This is Full Spectrum News, February 11th, 2021, hosted by Rob Yox. Welcome, everybody, to Full Spectrum News. My name is Rob Yox. We have a good show for you today. We've got a lot of video on today's show. It's a little video heavy, but we've also been investigating the January 6th Capitol riots. We'll also touch on the impeachment and a couple of other things going on right now. As we all know, we're being relegated to CDC guidelines of wearing two masks, a cloth and a surgical masks. Next, it's going to be 7 masks, 8 masks, 10 masks. Why not? Just take the whole pack, strap it to your face, walk out looking like a duck, regardless. But one of the things that we've been delving into, as we saw on the last special that we did, which was basically the conspiracy of how things came together for the election. And now what they're trying to do is they're trying to impeach the president on the grounds of January 6th. So before we get to the impeachment, we're going to get to the actual basically what happened on January 6th. Because what happens on January 6th is it wasn't meant to be that way. I was actually on air when the protesters ran into the Capitol. And if you could see me on the air, I was visibly saddened by what I saw. Nothing should have went down like that. They should have never ran in because one, what we were doing is we were protesting the certification of the votes. And two, what it did was it basically turned anybody and everybody that was on our side to fight for our case to side with the people across the aisle under the guise of essentially working together and bringing peace. But so we lost a lot from these people going into the Capitol building. Now, as we know, there were 5 actual deaths of the Capitol building. One gentleman had a heart attack. It's come out recently that he was hit in the eye with a projectile or a soft bullet, shall they say, which in turn gave him a heart attack and he died, unfortunately. And, prayers go out to his family. But the main story of January 6th, and one of the reasons why they're trying to impeach the president is because of Capitol Police Officer Sicknick. This gentleman, Brian Sicknick, was a hero. He was one of our heroes. We respect the police at all avenues. They are doing things that we wouldn't normally do, run into the face of danger, protect people. This put them in an awkward position when all this happened. Now, we could get into semantics and specifics. What we're going to do is we're going to really look at his story. Also, what was going on behind the scenes leading up to that moment, January 6th. So, first, let's start that we know that the Capitol Police were severely, severely outnumbered. A lot of people said, we knew that this was going to happen. Why didn't the so-called authorities, shall we say, whether it be the FBI, the Congress, the Senate, why didn't they appropriate specific people as backup to these Capitol Police officers? As we see now, DC is like the green zone in Iraq. This is like a completely locked down DC. There's fencing, there's walls, there's, you know, basically National Guard everywhere. Why couldn't they have some of that in place before all of this went down on the 6th, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to get into a little bit of a conspiracy now because of the mishandling of information surrounding that date. One thing we're going to talk about to relegate the backup portion of it was Mike Pompeo actually came out and said, to the Capitol Police, who, there has been a lot of mysterious deaths of high-ranking Capitol Police officials that, the suicide things, very sketchy stuff. So Mike Pompeo he said, you know what? to the chief of the Capitol Police. He said, "Look, it's going to be a really large gathering. Maybe we should put in for you to have some backup." They denied it. Then, after thinking about it, the Capitol Police went to Congress and the Senate and said maybe we should appropriate backup, and they were denied. They didn't think that it was going to be that big, such and such. The FBI was also going to be there to back up some of the Capitol Police officers. That did not happen. We don't know where all of that went down. So, unfortunately, the acts of the few basically determined the outcome for the many, right? Which what I said before. And we lost a Capitol Police officer that day. God bless him and God rest his soul. He is a hero. And it should have never happened. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into his story a little bit because there seems to be like I said, a lot of misinformation about it. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to go into a small video of what mainstream media was saying about Brian Sicknick, the Capitol Police officer.
Last night by Capitol Police. Reports that he may have been hit in the head with a fire extinguisher while trying to deal with the surging mob.
Of Congress, while lawmakers were forced to hide under their desks, he was struck with a fire extinguisher, according to 2 law enforcement officials. That's all we know so far.
Capitol Hill cop Brian Sicknick was killed by a blow to the head with a fire extinguisher, but it's not clear if he was hit during this incident.
Murder investigation is underway. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick was severely injured when rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol Wednesday. Officer Sicknick died Thursday night of those injuries.
So this was the talking point that the mainstream media was going with. And one of the things that we like to do here is we essentially debunk mainstream media. So leave it till about 2 days ago. Here's an article that came out on revolver.news. And this specific article talks about a lot of different things that happened while this controversy came up. So what it says is that last week CNN was tactfully baffled by a simple question that grows stronger by the day. Why are investigators struggling to build a murder case in the death of U.S. Capitol Police Officer Sicknick? This is true. This is, why is it so difficult? It's been months now, and yet nothing, and I mean nothing, has come our way on the lines of, any type of case being built for this gentleman's death. It was a very unfortunate thing that this man died, and all the people that went into the Capitol building should be prosecuted. That is, I mean, it's criminal trespassing at least, right? So we know that the stakes were very high for Officer Sicknick's death, and it only purported that, the tourist crowd was largely there, idly standing by, just protesting. So basically what happens now is a lot of mainstream media comes out and they say those talking points like I just showed you, and it's pretty wild how far this really gets, right? So now they have this label to all of this, and they're saying that the people who are of the MAGA group or mob is domestic terrorists because they insightfully went into the building and also killed police officers in their line of duty. Now, here's where things get a little bit fishy, right? So now that we have this impeachment, which we'll get into, they're using this story to basically try and impeach a president who is no longer president of the United States, which is unconstitutional in so many ways. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to label this event as a bloodbath. Like I said, it is unfortunate that this gentleman died, but it was not a bloodbath. If you notice that the other 4 people who passed away were MAGA supporters, this man himself, Brian Sicknick, was a MAGA supporter. So, these are serious allegations about domestic terror and things like that. So let's look at what we're looking at, right? So this brazen lie that they talked about, and this is what the narrative is the day after Sitnik's reported death, basically a lot of the New York Times and the headlines, they all confirm that this gentleman had passed away because of the mob. So here is the actual New York Times headline. It says, he dreamed of being a police officer, then was killed by a pro-Trump mob. The death of Brian Sitnik, a military veteran and experienced Capitol Police officer, amplifies the tragedy of Wednesday's riots and undermined President Trump's pro-law enforcement claims. So you see what they did there. They twisted the narrative to fit their specific, their specific story. And the death of anybody that gets politicized is an atrocity. It's an atrocity. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the other atrocities that this specific, that these specific companies, these media people, these newspapers who want nothing but clicks, these shows who want nothing but views. I don't care if 5 people watch this show. I don't care. As long as I know that I gave you the truth and I did my part in putting the truth out there and correcting the narrative, which is what we do here, then I've done everything I could to try and use my journalistic integrity to question, investigate, and make sure that we know all of the facts. So before we get any further into the death of this gentleman, let's look at some of these sublet issues with this riot. We know from evidence that there were Antifa members among these MAGA people inciting this, basically this siege on the Capitol building. Also, we have information that there are Ukrainian white supremacists who were actually inside of the crowd. And this is not a lot of people know about this aspect, but they are actual groups in the United States, but they are of Ukrainian descent. Now, let's take a look at some of the back issue. Who was the last person in American politics to have some sort of affiliation with the Ukraine? Let me think about that. Could it be Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son? Granted that they were talking about the corruption within a company, but the connections are striking here, right? So we know that there was Antifa and Ukrainian white supremacists. We also know that some of these people were MAGA people, and they went in there looking for a photo op, staying between the velvet, the velvet ropes, like if it was a tour, right? So come to find out that the FBI has released information that some of these people have been planning this since November. The 2 bombs that were set at the DNC and the RNC were both put there at between 5:30 and 7:30 the night before, which means that this was pre-planned, which essentially debunks the fact that Trump's rhetoric during that speech the next day on the 6th was actually what incited the riot. Also, we actually just got a new FBI insider today as well to add to the team. But I asked a couple of questions today to fill in the background of this, and much of what I'm saying is already present in what they're talking about, but they're basically tracking it on Facebook back to late November, which is right after the election. So to say that this man's, that what he said was the catalyst or the linchpin that sent these people in is, just utter ridiculousness. They just want to get him out of that spot by any means necessary. They don't want him to have the ability to run ever again. And we're going to go into how they actually incriminating themselves by saying what they said today and yesterday at the impeachment hearings. But let's keep going with this story first. So basically what happens, right? Let's get back to Brian Sitnik. The mainstream media and every outlet, USA Today, New York Post, Daily Dot, they keep repeating that Sitnik was bludgeoned by a fire extinguisher, but no sources say, many, they never said that. Sources say, or many believe that he was hit by the fire extinguisher. They said it as factual actuality. This definitely happened. Now, that like unequivocally, this is a statement of fact. But now it's coming out that Brian Sitnick never had a gash, was never hit with anything. And, the story is getting messed up somewhere in the mainstream media aspect and the actual events of the day. So basically, the New York Times, they put this statement out stating that this is, and I quote, then on Wednesday, pro-Trump rioters attacked the citadel of democracy, overpowered Mr. Sitnick, 42, and struck him in the head with a fire extinguisher, according to two law enforcement officials. With a bloody gash in his head, Mr. Sitnick was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support. He died Thursday evening, right? So basically, now law enforcement officials are telling CNN that there was no fire extinguisher blow, no bloody gash, and no blunt force trauma to Sitnick's body when he died. Not only that, it was increasingly unclear when, where, and if Sitnick was ever rushed to the hospital. So now we see this blatant lie or this media talking point. And what they're doing is they're setting it up for the impeachment later. Okay? Not that this was just an unfortunate chain of events and that this is basically a terrible thing that happened. Now they're trying to appropriate blame to the parties that they see fit, as we see, right? So, as it turns out, multiple hours after the protest had already concluded, Sitnick texted his own brother, Ken, that very night, saying he was basically fine. Rather than getting sprayed twice, he confirmed that he was in good shape. So now we know that he never got hit. Okay. They lied. They're distorting the narrative for their own political agendas, which is disgusting because this is a tragedy that somebody lost their life. To straight up blatantly lie and politicize it makes it that much more egregious, right? So here's the odd thing that happened. The next afternoon, the Sitnick family began getting phone calls that Officer Brian Sitnick had been declared dead. The phone calls didn't come from the hospital, did not come from the hospital. They did not come from treating physicians. They did not come from the U.S. Capitol Police, the FBI, or the Department of Justice. They came from media reporters. Let that sink in. Let that sink in for a minute. It came from media supporters. Huh. So they were privy to information that the FBI, the Department of Justice, or the Capitol Police did not have yet. Strange, right? Strange. So let's keep going. Let's keep going, right? So now, but the story gets even stranger from there. In a dark twist, here is what is said by a Capitol Police officer giving a statement. As apparently premature news of Sitnick's death spread in the law enforcement circles, the U.S. Capitol Police remained silent, including no response to an early request of confirmation from ProPublica on Thursday evening. Then the family learned from reporters' phone calls that something was wrong. Now, they asked, this is quotes from Ken Sitnick, the brother of Brian Sitnick. He says, "We have not gotten any phone calls," said when he was first contacted. Brian was the youngest of three siblings, all boys. So here's another quote. We're kind of overwhelmed right now. You guys are getting reports of his death. Before I even got anything. So basically, this is what they're telling the family now. The reporters, not any public official or treating physician, the reporters. So the U.S. Capitol Police responded in a public statement late Thursday evening that's swirling the media that reports were untrue and Sitnik was still alive. This is getting out of control. And that is coming from Craig Kaplan. And his exact quote was, U.S. Capitol Police spokesperson, media reports regarding the death of the United States Capitol Police officer are not accurate. Although some officers were injured and hospitalized yesterday, no official officer has passed away. That was at 5:21 p.m. on January 7th. The next day. Okay. 1 hour later, as Sitnik's family rushed to the hospital to see what they believed was their beloved Brian still fighting for his life, the U.S. Capitol Police issued a further statement. Now, Sitnik was dead. But even that statement contained a curious detail. Ken Sitnik had been told his brother collapsed inside the Capitol building, then was rushed to the hospital, which it still says on Wikipedia as the official story. Right? But the U.S. Capitol Police statement that night told a different story, that he had returned to his office at the police division first. So now, we know he texted his brother, which when he got back to the police division. So he never got hit. He never collapsed. He got sprayed with pepper spray, but all seemed fine. And then reports came in of his death by the media. So the family, thinking that he's still alive, rushed to the hospital to see what was actually going on, to find out that he had passed away an hour after they had been reporting. Which means that they may have actually, if he was okay up to that point, they may have actually had time to see him. But no attending physician called them to tell them that he was actually in the hospital. So here's what gets even odder, okay? This is where I really think that something is going on behind the scenes, because we are not privy to the same information. So, Acting Attorney General Jeff Rossen says the DOJ will spare no resources in getting to the bottom of what happened to Sitnik. Yet, well over a month after his death, precisely zero information has been disclosed by the DOJ, the FBI, the U.S. Capitol Police, and the D.C. medical examiner that cared for him at the hospital or the treating physician. It's crazy. This is crazy talk, okay? So 1 month after Sitnik's death, no autopsy has been released for reference. Autopsies take 2 to 4 hours to perform and are preliminarily the results typically available within 24 hours. So the investigators behind this are really upset at the lack of evidence that could prove someone caused his death. So the authorities have reviewed video photographs that show Sitnik engaging with rioters amid the siege, but have yet to identify a moment in which he suffered his fatal injuries. Ominously, no findings from the D.C. medical examiner have been released. No announcements have been made by the authorities about this ongoing process, right? So now there's no autopsy report. And, unannounced to anyone, incidentally, in the Sitnik's memorial, his remains turn up in an urn instead of a coffin. Sitnik's body had been cremated. That means no further forensic analysis can be done to establish the cause or time of Sitnik's death. Why? One's got to wonder, would a family still be searching for the answers? They have no autopsy results, no death certificate, no medical report. no authorization of cremation, or did his family authorize the cremation of this body? This is some of the stuff we're still trying to find out. But, you know, this is crazy. This is outrageous. It's outrageous that now he's cremated. They can't go further. So I want you guys in the comments of this specific broadcast, I want you to lead me what you think's going on, because I'm not going to speculate here. Maybe we'll talk about it later when we do Theory Thursday, which will be coming out tonight. But if you use Occam's razor, which is the most likely, with all the evidence that you have, the most likely conclusion is usually the simplest or easiest one to see. I feel that this specific incident has a lot of foul play in it. Not to mention all of the officers that have committed suicide up to this point that were involved with the Capitol riots. There is a lot of stuff going around, and there's a lot of misinformation floating around. But this is what we know so far. And if you ask me, it smells super fishy, super fishy. So let's get to the impeachment. Now, the impeachment is basically political theater. Let's just say that, because as they go forward, they actually have no substantiating facts or evidence of what exactly was the moment that the crowd turned violent on the 6th. See, these coincide with each other because of that story with Brian Sitnick, Capitol Officer Brian Sitnick. This is one of the many reasons that they're trying to impeach Trump right now. So what the first thing that they did was they were talking about his inflammatory rhetoric, I apologize, that incited insurrection, or what these people did. Now, we know that there are many, many others on the other side of the aisle that were directly responsible for saying specific things like Trump did during that speech. One of them is, we have to fight like hell. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to prove it to you right now.
In the Senate, Democrats are going to fight like hell to make this a reality. Americans who took to the streets this week have demanded change. With this legislation, Democrats are heeding their calls.
I want the people of Pennsylvania, the people all across this country, to know that we are going to fight like hell to protect your vote, to secure your vote, and to make sure that your vote is counted.
How confident are you that Kentuckians are going to have the ability to vote freely in November?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm confident that we're going to fight like hell to make sure they can.
We are going to fight like hell to make sure that everyone who wants to vote can exercise that right to vote.
This election is coming whether the president wants it or not, and we're going to fight like hell in Congress to make sure that the mail still works.
Today, Biden's VP Kamala Harris told supporters in a fundraising note that it is time to, quote, fight like hell to protect the Supreme Court following the passing of late Justice Ginsburg.
That legacy of rights needs to be continued. I'm going to fight like hell. Speaking for myself, I'm going to fight like hell.
Aaron, we're going to fight like hell.
The reforms, we're going to fight like hell to get those reforms in.
And I know many other senators and members of the House will fight like hell to make sure that we act as soon as possible.
I just have one thing to say about the next 8 days. I'm going to fight like hell.
The president will go into the White House and will fight like hell to make sure they get the health care they need.
Mitch McConnell believes that this fight is over. What Mitch McConnell does not understand is this fight has just
begun, huh? So now we know that some of the specific rhetoric that is said on the left has been the direct result of violence. Bernie Sanders said that the Republicans are trying to kill you by taking away your health care. And we know that at that ball field days later, a Bernie bro went out and shot at Republican heads of state where Steve Scalise was injured, and he tried to kill people, right? We know that the riots over the entire summer of 2020 were basically amped up by the rhetoric of the Democrats. And the Democrats even went so far to bail out people who had gotten arrested for destroying businesses and creating violence. In Seattle, a gentleman who was part of a prayer group was shot in cold blood because they allowed these riots to go on. So for them to do this impeachment is calling the kettle black. It's inflammatory. It's disgusting. And I think it's one of the most egregious things that they could possibly do, because here's one of the things I'm going to tell you too. What they're trying to do with this impeachment is cancel the MAGA movement. Now, the MAGA movement is more than just Donald Trump, which is what they fail to realize. But they think that if they cut the head off the snake, the body won't grow back 6 heads like a hydra. That's a Dan Bongino statement, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But this movement is a populist movement. They can't stop it. And that's why we have to have our parallel economy, so they can't cancel anybody. It's like Mike Lindell. They came out against Mike Lindell. Now, we know one of Joe Biden's executive orders was basically cutting the resources for people who had opioid addiction to get the help that they needed. Mike Lindell also, besides the fact that he was talking about the election, whether he's right or wrong, Mike Lindell has something called the Recovery Network, where he helps millions upon millions of people get off drugs, stop suicides because they're on those drugs. And now specific churches won't work with him because they feel that he is on that cancel culture and they don't want to get canceled. So basically, they're canceling a man, which if you want to cancel the business side of it, I get that. But the Recovery Network is what Google is not letting go up to the top of the search boards anymore, or the search engines, where people need that help. They need to find that Recovery Network. So what they're telling you is that they don't care about you as a person. Some of these people that have these drug addictions, they need the most help out of anybody. And if they're willing to cut the legs or the Achilles tendon of those people by taking out these programs that are supposedly there to help them, they don't care about the American people. And they're blatant about it. But before we finish up today, I'm gonna show you another video. It's gonna do some of the same videos that I showed you about. We fight like hell, right? But it's important because when they're trying to impeach Donald Trump, they've set the precedent that people who are not in office anymore, it's constitutional to impeach them, right? Or that their own rhetoric is not going to get them in trouble. If you're going to hold Donald Trump for his words and his standards, it has to be held on both sides of the aisle. So what happens now, right? So now what happens is they feel that they have this ability to persecute him for doing the same things that they've done. The hypocrisy is so apparent, and I'm going to show it to you right now, okay? This hypocrisy is by far one of the craziest things that you will ever see. So let's have a listen. This is 2 minutes and 19 seconds by A64. Please watch this. This is important.
Donald Trump committed a massive crime against our Constitution and our people, and the worst violation of the presidential oath of office in the history of the United States of America.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
By telling the mob that their election had been stolen from them. I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified. Even then, after that vicious attack, he continued to spread the big lie.
I think it's also critical to understand you can run the best campaign and you can have the election stolen from you.
This was months
of cultivating a base of people who were violent. Praising that violence.
And everyone beware. They're not going to let up, and they should not.
And he still gave that marching orders and, quote, fight like hell.
Democrats are going to fight like hell.
And we're going to fight like hell.
We'll fight like hell.
And we'll fight like hell.
But can you imagine telling your supporters that the only way you could possibly lose is if an American election was rigged and stolen from you?
And you can have the election stolen from you.
And ask yourself whether you've ever seen anyone at any level of government make the same claim about their own election.
And you can have the election stolen from you.
And in the months the president made these statements, people listened. Armed supporters surrounded election officials' homes. The Secretary of State for Georgia got death threats.
And they were shouting threats, to us to kill us. We cannot go outside now. It's become so dangerous for us.
When he saw firsthand the violence that his conduct was creating,
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be.
he didn't condemn the violence, incited it further.
They're not going to let up, and they should not.
That's exactly our point. Did you see that? Okay. Talk about inciting riots. Okay. Talk about inciting riots. That right there, it should not, and it won't, and it will not. That's the worst of them all. That directly attributed to over 50 deaths, to over 6,000 police officers nationwide, probably so many more that we haven't had that was recorded, or minor injuries. 6,000 major injuries to police officers across the nation. Okay? Stop the hypocrisy. Stop the hypocrisy. I'm Rob Yox. This has been Full Spectrum News. God bless all of you out there. God bless our police officers and our military, our heroes. And God bless the United States of America. Good night.